Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining me. This is going to be an analysis of David Fincher's 1995 film Se7en, starring Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman. To avoid anyone committing the sin of wrath, this will contain spoilers, so if you haven't already, you may want to watch the film first, then come back to this video afterwards and let me know what you think then. Now, Se7en tells the story of two detectives hunting a serial killer whose victims represent each of the 7 deadly sins. What I'm going to be talking about for this video is who is the next chosen one to continue the murders. During the escort scene, John Doe refers to himself as the chosen one, but he also alludes several times to Mills being the next person chosen to carry out the work. For example, "You're going to be remembered after this," "You're only alive because I didn't kill you," and "the rest of what's life I've allowed you to have." The important word here is I've, short form of I have, as in he has already decided what kind of life Mills will have. So this gives indication that Mills is some kind of a target. The question then becomes, why Mills? Now, if we're talking about bringing a person down to your level, then wouldn't Somerset be a much more interesting and, dare say, rewarding character to break? Someone who still hasn't got used to the sight of guns and never even pulled the trigger, at least not until the end of the film. Comparing Mills and Somerset, Somerset is the older, experienced detective who is come towards the end of his career. In fact, he is literally 7 days away from retirement at the beginning of the film, and by his own admission has grown apathetic towards life. Mills, on the other hand, is someone who needs to prove himself. He's not quite a rookie, but he's new to the region and eager to show he knows what he's doing or he can handle himself. So rather than apathy, he perhaps cares too much. But in that, he has some serious flaws. He is very reactionary, doesn't always think things through. He's quite arrogant and pompous at times, insisting that John Doe is merely insane and dismissive of any suggestions otherwise. He seemingly has a happy home life with his wife Tracy and their dogs, but the fact that Mrs. Mills was more comfortable talking to Somerset, a relative stranger, about her pregnancy fears suggests there are problems that aren't on camera. Now, going over to the killer, John Doe, as I mentioned, he chooses his victims based on the 7 sins. So I'm going to do a brief overview of each sin. Gluttony is excessive consumption of food. Greed is the excessive desire for materialism or the unwillingness to be charitable. Sloth is the excessive laziness or unwillingness to make any real effort. Envy is the excessive desire for that which is not ours or not a part of our life. Wrath is extreme anger to the point of taking revenge. Pride is the excessive self-esteem and to the point of vanity or arrogance. And lust is excessive desire for pleasure, usually but not limited to sexual pleasure. Now, there's at least 2 things that all of these have in common. One, they all refer to some form of excess. The thing about excess is that it's not a specified amount. What is considered excessive in one scenario is moderate in another. 2, although they refer to specific things, they're also to some degree interchangeable with each other. All that separates them is the cause and or emotions involved. So there's always going to be some level of ambiguity as to what qualifies as each sin. For example, gluttony, the excessive consumption of food. However, if a person eats a lot because they see food as a luxury, then it becomes greed. In particular, if the person isn't willing to share the food. If the person is eating a lot because they're too lazy to do anything else and the food gives them an excuse to not really try, then it becomes sloth. If a person is eating a lot because they are trying to be like someone else, it becomes envy. If it's because they're angry with a situation, it becomes wrath. If it's because they see food as a form of self-pampering, it's pride. And if it's to fulfill a fantasy or the desire for the pleasure of taste itself, then it becomes lust. So let's go back to Detective Mills. From when we're introduced to him, Somerset asks why he actually fought to be assigned to this place, something that he hadn't seen done before. Mills replies dismissively, "I thought I could do some good." This shows his pride in that he sees himself as the one to clean up this neighborhood. The dismissiveness could be seen as a way of showing lack of respect for Somerset, perhaps not seeing him as being on the same level and just someone that he has got to deal with, or at least at that particular point of the film. I mentioned before that Somerset had grown apathetic, But during the gluttony murder scene, we see Mills to be somewhat lackadaisical. He's making jokes, doesn't seem to be taking it seriously, and was pretty quick to call it a coronary issue just before they saw the feet were bound. So here is where we see the lazy or the sloth side of Mills. A few instances where Mills expresses his desire to be granted the case that was assigned to Somerset. The first was on Monday in the captain's office. Somerset didn't think Mills was ready for the case, and the captain turns down his request. But this shows that he's, at least on some level, envious of what Somerset has. The second was on Tuesday after Somerset points out the 7 deadly sins. At that point, the continued persistence shows Mills to have a level of greed, which in turn links to gluttony, as he's refusing to accept he's not ready for the case and is attempting to bite off more than he can chew, so to speak. After the chase scene, Mills is left beaten by John Doe. When they go back to the apartment, Mills is angry. Somerset tries to calm down the situation, but Mills allows his anger to control his actions by kicking the door in without a warrant and displaying his wrath at that moment. Towards the end of the film, when they're escorting John Doe, we get a glimpse of Mills' lust, the desire to hurt Doe, only refraining due to fear of punishment. Similar to what Somerset previously said about attrition. Now, to be fair, that was all John Doe's own observation, but worthy of note is Mills only made a very weak and quickly shot down attempt at denying it, suggesting that it is true. Now, some of the sins do have other examples throughout the film, but ultimately what it comes to is that Mills is a person who displays traits of all the sins, just not to an excess, with the exception of wrath. Wrath being the specific sin needed to carry out the killings of vengeance. This is why I think Mills was chosen by John Doe, because he needs someone who can not only recognize the sins as they are part of who he is, but can also use their anger to bring their own form of justice. It's likely Doe would have found out a lot about Mills by masquerading as a reporter and buying information from the police. Once he had all the information he needed on Mills, all he needed to do then was push him over the edge, and he does this by killing his wife. His wife, who dies before they can resolve whatever problems they were having, before she could even tell him, assuming that she was going to, that she was pregnant. So now Mills, a person who has some of all these traits and a lot of anger, then does exactly what he was chosen to do. He's no longer just displaying anger, he becomes anger. He becomes wrath and kills envy. And that's what I think of Seven. Let me know if you agree or disagree. Be sure to comment, share, subscribe. The next film I plan on talking about is X-Men First Class, which I plan on having ready in about a week-ish after this video goes live. So if you haven't already seen X-Men First Class, be sure to check it out. I also plan on doing Toy Story 3, Body of Lies, The Matrix, Akira. So make sure you check those out as well if you haven't already. They are all fantastic films. I'm also working my way through Deus Ex. This might take a little while, but all still to come. But for now, thank you for watching, and until next time, if you happen to one day find yourself reading Guns and Ammo and masturbating into your own feces, you may want to seek help.